Hi everyone, it's Elaine Hamilton from the Reiki Center. In this session, I wanted to talk about the awakening process. Big topic, I know. And it's really been triggered by a few things, a few conversations I've been having with people, and also some of the people that I see. It's just this fascinating resistance to coming into the present moment. And there's a reason for that. So there's a reason why we spend so much of our time in the fantasy land of our mind. And what I mean by that is when we conjure up stories, and that could be daydreaming in general, it could be thinking about what happened in the past, it could be planning in terms of thinking about how you're going to approach something in the future. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but oftentimes when there is some difficulty happening in our lives, or like at the moment, I've got a tricky situation at work, and I notice that often I will go into literally fantasy land of thinking about when I next see this person, how I'm going to respond, how I'm going to talk to them, what my justifications are going to be. And I can spend a lot of my day in various forms of this. So not here in the present moment, but out in the future, like going over these complete fantasies of when I see them, what I'll say, what they'll say, what we'll do, what will happen next, right? Or going back into my past and reliving moments in the past, what happened, what they said, what I did, blah, 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 or what I could have done better. Now, I point all this out because when you start to become more self-aware, you start to realize how much of that is going on in your life. So in a 12-hour space of your day, probably most of us are awake longer than that, right? 16 hours. How much of your time is actually spent in the present moment, right here, right now? And how much of your time is spent chasing something that isn't actually happening now? And so the whole purpose, again, in my opinion, of getting more clarity through meditation, through mindfulness, through techniques of slowing down the mind, or having that awareness of realizing that you are not your thoughts, that when you go into a daydreaming mode, and by daydreaming mode, I mean any kind of thought patterns that are pulling you away from what is happening in this very moment. Right. So in this very moment, I'm talking and you're listening. That's present moment. Now, sometimes I think one of the reasons why people love to get lost in a book or get lost in a TV program is because they are kind of being present. They're in that moment following a story. They're not in their heads following a different story. Now, you could say, well, that's not very present moment, but I do notice for myself that when I watch TV, it's something in my body can just relax totally. When I'm in my head thinking about things, I notice that my body actually tenses up. Like I can tell when I'm not present because my jaw starts to tighten. Sometimes my shoulders start to feel quite stressed. My breathing changes. And so I'm moving away from my body, and the body is always in the present moment, right? The body can't live in the past or the future. So it's a very good barometer for how your thinking is affecting your body. And oftentimes we don't realize that our thinking is affecting our body until we deliberately start to do mindfulness or meditation or have some kind of deeper awareness that there are many layers to our existence. So for me, the first part of awakening, the very first part, is waking up to that. And it's a very subtle shift, but it's a non-reversed shift. So you can have lots of experiences in meditation or spirituality. You can have all kinds of experiences of presence or spiritual images or feelings or moments of bliss, moments of deep peace, moments of deep awareness as well. But then it's like when you finish that meditation or when that experience is complete, done, then it becomes a memory, and you can't conjure it up, right? So an experience is something that you go through in the moment and it doesn't stay with you. Whereas when you have an awakening, that awakening moment stays with you. That awakening moment, that's not the right term, but that that awakeness. So that realization that you are not your thoughts. And I know this sounds really obvious, but it's that ability to notice that that presence, that sense of awakeness, the sense of seeing, let's say, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just that beingness is not, I'm going to say not related, but not attached or what's the word I'm looking for? Not determined by what is being thought. So there's a whole bunch of thoughts, and even to the point of the body itself, right? The sense of beingness is not dependent on how the body's feeling, what the body's thinking, whether it's upset, whether it's happy, whether it's sad, whether it's cold, whether it's hot. It's just not determined by any of those features at all. And it is this underlying sense of presence that never changes. It never changes. And it's so obvious that when you first see it, it's really like, how did I miss this? But then once you see it, it doesn't go away. So the first step of awakening, and that really varies. Like for some people, like for myself, it was more like a what? What? It was literally like a what the fuck moment. It was like, what? But nothing else really changed. So the reason why I bring this up is because, a lot of people might have had this shift and not even realize they had the shift, because there's lots of other things that don't really shift. Like your sense of self is still really strong. Your ego is really strong. Like your belief systems are still there. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that sticks around. And then what you hear, like I do think a lot of the more famous spiritual teachers, people like Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie and, even Adyashanti to a point, they had quite deep shifts that blew out a lot of their ego and their belief systems. And so they had quite a dramatic kind of shift. So when they talk about it, they talk about it from that perspective. And from the Zen perspective, their perspective is you wake up and that's it. Like everything is kind of blown out. And I think that's fair enough. Like if you've had that experience and that's how you're going to teach it. But there's lots of other teachers like Rupert Spira to be, for example, and Angelo DeLulo, and there's a whole bunch of other teachers that had a much more staged shift. So they kind of woke up to this idea of, oh, I'm not my thoughts and I'm not my body and I'm not, it's like this is something entirely ineffable. It's like it's not a describable feeling of self. And then after that, there's a lot of other work that then needs to happen in the dismantling of all the mantles, right? It's kind of like, so if you imagine, it's like we're born and as babies, we come in and we're just pure awareness. Like everything is just as it is. Everything is just as it is. And then we start to layer it with structures. Now, I know I talk about this a lot, but it's like those structures can be, depending on the individual and depending on your upbringing and depending on how big a blowout you have when you first have that awareness of, there is so the key thing is like there's this underlying sense of presence of the I amness that is never changing. It's never changing. And it is not dependent on how good or bad you feel. It's not dependent on emotion. It's not dependent on thoughts. It's not dependent on how good the weather is. Like nothing. It's not dependent on how stressed out you are. Underneath it, you can always, always come back to this very deep sense of peace and okayness. And I think one of the reasons why I always talk about Reiki being a path to freedom, being a path to this spiritual awakening, is because in your self-practice, this is where you come back to. So when you do your self-practice, underneath, even if when you're doing your self-practice, you're not getting rid of all your thoughts and stuff. That's just mythology. Your thoughts are irrelevant. They're as irrelevant as the cloudy day. What has the cloudy day got to do with your universal presence, right? What is your thinking? What's going on in your head? What does the pace of your heart? What does how well your liver pumps? Livers don't pump. How well your liver's doing, how full your bladder is. How have any of these things got to do with the presence or the universal life force that is constantly there, right? And when you know that, when you have dropped into that moment where you're like, oh, that's what I am, then in my definition, you've woken up to your truth, right? That's your truth. Like, that's what it is. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of other scaffolding that happens, right? It doesn't mean you suddenly become this like spiritual guru. It just means that you are aware of what you are, right? That's it. Are you aware of what you are? And if you are, then it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of this other stuff blows out. Like you might be feeling exactly the same. You might have the same hang-ups. You might have the same preferences. You might have the same triggers, the same trauma. I mean, there's this idea that it just becomes a blissful state. Maybe it happens to 1 or 2 people per billion, maybe. I mean, there are stories about that, right? Why wouldn't you believe that? But it doesn't happen to the majority of people that are on the spiritual path. For the majority of people, they might wake up to this very deep knowing of what they are, but then that doesn't mean that all the structures and the preferences and the biases and the belief systems and all that programming, which is essentially the programming of the mind, that doesn't mean all that blows out as well. So then there can be a very long stage whereby you're noticing that dismantling. And sometimes you are in process of dismantling it, and sometimes it is just simply dropping away, or you notice that the way you feel about things are dropping away. Your tendency to get caught in the daydreaming momentum starts to slow down, or you start to notice it more. Now, just because you notice it more doesn't necessarily mean you can stop it. Often I talk about it like if you stop a cruise ship, you need to give it something like 12 miles to stop. That's a long stop. You have to plan. It's like planning, right? I hope that's right. I tell everybody that. So hopefully that's a correct statistic. Who knows? But the idea is like braking distance, right? So even though you have the intention to stop something, doesn't mean that you have any control over how long the momentum goes. However, coming back to the point of this, is that when we practice mindfulness, when we practice meditation, it is an avenue. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who wakes up or wants to wake up needs to do meditation. I'm not saying that, because there's lots and lots of ways that people wake up. Some people are just sitting on the toilet and they wake up. Some people, like, what's his name? There's an alcoholic that just woke up through being incredibly drunk. That's a pretty cool way. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, so there's all manner of waking up. Byron Katie was in she was drying out. She was also an alcoholic as well. So there's many, many ways that you can hit that bottom. For me, I prefer meditation. It's gentler and it is just more preferable to me than going into a major mental health crisis. So but we all have different makeups. And honestly, I think we all have different ways that the life force is informing us and moving through us and all that kind of thing, right? So if you are drawn, and this is where I think the crux is, like we are all drawn to different ways of living our lives, and there is no one proper way. Like you just read or do some research around all the different ways that people do their spiritual growth, and you can see very clearly that different people are attracted to different things. For those of you listening to me, like me, you're probably attracted to Reiki and probably attracted to the more meditative ways of opening yourself towards insight. So the whole purpose then of mindfulness in this path, the whole purpose of mindfulness is to allow you to start to distinguish and discern, when am I in the present moment and when am I off in my fantasy? Now, when you're off in your fantasy, what is happening is you are caught in a mind storm of some sort, right? Whether you're thinking about the past, regrets, how I should have done it better, what should have happened, what shouldn't have happened, all that kind of stuff, or whether you're in the future daydreaming about what am I going to say to this person? How am I going to act with this person? What am I going to do in this situation? Both of these thoughts are not here and now, like right here, right now, you're listening to certain vibrations that are being caused through me talking, and in your mind, we have that amazing capacity to formulate those vibrations into sounds, into words, into meaning. That's incredible, right? Just there and then, it's like, wow, that's just nuts, seriously. But we're doing that. And right here in the present moment, as you're listening to my voice, you're probably also aware of your body, whether it's relaxed, you're also aware of your environment in terms of what's the temperature, how's it feeling. You might be aware of other sounds going on as well. Like there's a whole bunch of things going on in this very present moment, in the richness of this moment. Right? So when we start to cultivate a more mindful or meditative approach, personally speaking, the benefit of that is that we then start to open to the possibility of that presence, that I am, if you want to call it the I amness. That's got its own traps later on, but let's stick with the kind of beginning version, because honestly, if I give you the full picture, it's like at some point you will hit the I amness and realize that's also a dual perspective, right? So at some point you got to get rid of that as well, but that's down the line. Ultimately, in the beginning, what you're trying to do is really get this sense of awareness that is that part of you that never changes, has never changed through your life either. So time also doesn't change it. That same essence that you feel now, that you first remember feeling when you were 5 or 6 or whatever, that thing, whatever, not even a thing, but that consciousness, presence, awakeness that was peering out of your eyes when you were 5 or 6 or 7 or whenever your first memories are as a child, and has never changed. Now, we can all find that. And something like Reiki allows us to drop into it time and time and time again until there comes a shift. And the only shift that's happening is that awareness of that's what you are. That's it. That's kind of like, oh, I'm that. I'm that. And it sounds really obvious. And for many of you, you'd be like, yeah, I already know that. Congratulations. You're on the path. You've woken up. And it's a really hard thing to believe, because it's like, no, because I should be experiencing bliss, or I should be experiencing this or that, or whatever you think spiritual enlightenment is going to get you. But it's actually a dismantling process. So it's freeing ourselves from this addictive thinking that we're constantly being rushed into the future or daydreaming into the future, or we're constantly being reflective about the past, what happened in the past. And that's not to say these things are wrong. There's nothing that says you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be racing into the future or the past. It's how aware you are as you're doing this. Like, do you get lost? And for most of us, myself included, when I'm daydreaming into the past or the future, it's like I literally lose consciousness. Like that part of me that at the moment is awake and aware and talking to you gets lost. It gets lost in story. It gets lost in conjecture. It gets lost in he says, she says. And I guess in that sense, maybe it is a little bit like watching TV, because I love getting lost in TV. And maybe that is like the little break for my conscious awareness. I don't know, who knows? But I would say, what am I trying to say? I would say that the act of practicing mindfulness and meditation and Reiki, because Reiki enables all of these. When you do your Reiki, I'm sure you're aware that you become much more mindful, right? You become much more present. You become much more alert to your thinking patterns and how much thinking is happening or how quiet it is or whatever is going on. And all of these things, in my humble opinion, really helps. It helps to bring you closer to your truth. So notice when you are resisting that. Like when you come into the present moment through your Reiki practice, through mindfulness, whatever, and you think things like, this is really boring, or this is unbearable. Like, why is it unbearable? That's weird, right? Why would it be unbearable just to sit quietly? Or I have better things to do than sit here, or I have too many things to do. All of these are thought hooks. They're tricks. They're tricks by the mind, and the mind wants to be in charge, right? The mind wants to tell you where to go and throw you around and all the rest of it, but the mind is not you. Your thoughts, the thinking patterns. So it's like the computer. It's like what we dread with AI. AI will take over the world. Your mind is AI. It is programmed, 100% programmed. And then it learns how to protect itself and how to continue living in your head rent-free, how to continue running those programs over and over and over again. Because I promise you, when you go back into your daydreaming of what shouldn't have happened, you've thought that 100 million times before. And when you go into the future, planning what you're going to say to this person, that person, the other person, you will do that over and over and over again as well. So these programs just keep going round and round in circles. There's nothing new that it adds to your life. And there is no richness in that, compared with if you're sitting in the present moment and really allow yourself to be present to all the sensations, everything that's going on. There's a deep richness and mystery to what is happening right here, right now. There's no mystery in the mind thinking backwards and forwards. It's really bland and flat. And it sometimes conjures up pretty gross emotions. By gross, I mean not subtle. So anger, fear, anxiety. These are big, gross emotions that just right? We're very used to them. But it doesn't conjure up wonder, joy, doesn't conjure up a deep sense of stillness, contentment. Like none of these things, right? You can't find those in your thoughts. Maybe, but I don't find it in my thoughts. What I find in my thoughts is sometimes thoughts of superiority, judgment, dissatisfaction, anger, fear, anxiety, stress, like nothing that I really want to hang on to be honest. So anyway, why am I saying all this? It's something for consideration. when you drop into your Reiki practice and you are trying to be mindful, you're trying to be meditative, just starting to notice when that mind storm starts to come in, and it's very seductive, right? It's very seductive. It's very seducing. It's like, this is more important to think about. This is more juicy to think about. We need to think about this so we're ready, or we need to think about the past so we don't do that again, or whatever. But then when you really drop into the present moment and give yourself permission to duck under all those thoughts can still be there. I mean, they're irrelevant, but to drop under those thoughts into the stillness and the feeling of awakeness and awareness that you are, that is your true foundational space. And then really feel into, what is the mystery in here? Like, what is the beauty in here? What is the satisfaction or the contentment or the stillness? And that stillness in and of itself is deep. It's immense. It's like, it holds everything. And there's no need to go chasing for these very flimsy, and this is what it starts to feel like. It feels like it's very flimsy structures of stories that we tell ourselves that are not satisfying. It's not satisfying to live in the future or the past. And so that's, the mindfulness starts to show you that. And then the more you see it, the more you want to stay in the present moment. In the beginning, the mind is incredibly insistent that the present moment is boring. There's nothing going on. Let's not go here. Let's go somewhere else, right? That is very common. And that can last for years, by the way. It's not something that you just snap out of suddenly. But when you start to see it more and more and more, then your tendency is to stay in the present moment more and more and more, because it does become more interesting than your thoughts. Just does, because your thoughts are really flat, actually. They're kind of boring and they're very cyclical, like they're very predictable. And so it does get boring. Whereas the present moment, even though that your mind tells you it's boring, is constantly alive and rich and moving and changing. And it's kind of like fascinating. It's fascinating. So that's my encouragement to you, that when you are doing your Reiki practice, your mindfulness, your meditation, is you are looking for what I'm describing here. Like, what is your true nature? Like, what is the truth of what you are? Not who you are. You're not a who. You're a what, right? So having the insight into that. And if you've already had that insight and you already know that you're a what, then spending more and more and more time in that and exploring from that perspective the mechanics of the way the programming, the ego programming, works on top of that. Because ideally, the more you do that, the more it can start to dissolve. Because you can imagine that just because you wake up into, oh, I'm presence, I'm awakeness, I'm awareness, but you're still being caught in all those thought storms, and you're constantly being dragged around here and there by your thoughts and your programming and your patterns, then essentially nothing really changes, because you might be aware of what you are, but if you're not dissolving any of it, and I'm not saying you dissolve anything because you are the programming. It's really confusing to talk about, but there's something, and again, this is just my opinion, but there's something around the mindfulness and really dropping into the truth of what you are time and time and time again, consciously, that personally I think helps. I might be wrong. I know the radical non-dual crowd will say you're wrong, there's nothing you can do. In my experience, that's not actually true. In my experience, you can do stuff. You can be more mindful, you can be more aware, you can work with the energy and align yourself with the energy rather than fight against it. So, and if you're resonating with that message, then that's where I'd say you go. You know, I do think that everyone finds their own message, and it might change over time as well. But there's a reason why you're attracted to certain messages and not others, and trust that. At the end of the day, your process is not going to be the same as Eckhart Tolle's. is not going to be the same as Byron Katie or Adyashanti. Like we all have unique openings that we evolve through, right? So that's just a fact. So you can't follow somebody else's path, but you might be attracted to certain people's paths at different times because that's the right message for you to hear, and you need to listen to that as well, right? Okay, that's all from me, and I hope that was useful, and see you next time.